Trump tells NATO allies to pay up. U.S. President Donald Trump has told his NATO allies in Brussels that all members of the alliance must pay their fair share of defense spending. Massive amounts of money were owed, he said, voicing a long-held U.S. concern that others are not paying enough. But NATO's current spending target of 2% of GDP on defense is not due to be met until 2024. Again condemning Monday's bombing in Manchester, Mr. Trump said terrorism must be stopped in its tracks. He called for a moment of silence in memory of the 22 adults and children killed in the savage attack. Mr. Trump also warned about the risk posed by uncontrolled immigration and the threat posed by Russia. Terrorism must be stopped in its tracks, or the horror you saw in Manchester, and so many other places, will continue forever, he said. You have thousands and thousands of people pouring into our various countries and spreading throughout, and in many cases we have no idea who they are. We must be tough, we must be strong, and we must be vigilant. Before visiting NATO headquarters, Mr. Trump met several EU leaders for the first time, including France's new president, Emmanuel Macron. Is the U.S. right about NATO spending? 23 of the 28 member nations are still not paying what they should be paying and what they're supposed to be paying for their defense, Mr. Trump said. This is not fair to the people and taxpayers of the United States, and many of these nations owe massive amounts of money from past years and from not paying in those past years. According to NATO's 2016 annual report, only 5 countries met the 2% target: the US, the UK, Greece, Poland, and Estonia. By contrast, Germany spent 1.2% on defense, but Berlin argues that its spending on development aid also contributes to international security. The U.S. has long criticized fellow NATO countries for spending less on defense than the agreed figure of 2% of national output. NATO has now agreed to take a bigger role in the fight against Islamist militants, particularly so-called Islamic State, but France and Germany insist the move is mostly symbolic. NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg said NATO states would contribute more in terms of information sharing and air-to-air refueling. This will send a strong political message of NATO's commitment to the fight against terrorism and also improve our coordination within the coalition, but it does not mean that NATO will engage in combat operations, he said. There are concerns that NATO joining the anti-IS coalition could lead to the alliance becoming embroiled in post-conflict Iraq or Libya as it did in Afghanistan, says the BBC's Jonathan Marcus. Do they agree about Russia? After meeting Mr. Trump earlier on Thursday, European Council President Donald Tusk said they had agreed on many areas but had differences over Russia. I'm not 100% sure we can say that we have a common position, a common opinion on Russia, although when it comes to the conflict on Ukraine we were on the same line, he said. Mr. Trump has been criticized for his admiration of Russian President Vladimir Putin, and his administration is embroiled in allegations of close ties with Russian interests. Mr. Tusk stressed the fundamental Western values like freedom, human rights, respect for human dignity at the heart of relations with the U.S. Minor diplomatic masterpiece, analysis by BBC Europe correspondent Kevin Connolly. Donald Trump's timetable in Brussels is a minor diplomatic masterpiece of its kind, maximizing as it does the number of meetings and minimizing the amount of public speaking and press scrutiny which will follow them. In the morning he met leaders of the EU, among them European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker, who once complained that 2 years would be wasted educating the new president about a world he does not know. In the afternoon he went to the headquarters of NATO, an organization he once described as obsolete and whose European members he's criticized for not spending enough on their own defense. It was not difficult, though, to construct an agenda for those meetings which focuses on very broad areas of agreement, like the importance of the fight against terrorism, and if the day proceeds without diplomatic incident, Europe's leaders will at least be able to reflect on face-to-face meetings with the world's most talked-about political personality. Did climate change come up? Some issues remain open, like climate and trade, Mr. Tusk said after he and European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker met Mr. Trump. EU leaders are concerned that Mr. Trump may abandon a U.S. commitment to reduce greenhouse gases under the UN Paris Accord. President Macron said after his meeting with Mr. Trump, "As for climate, well, President Trump can assert his position. I respect the fact he has reviewed the Paris Agreement. I reiterated the importance of the agreement. Are there signs of any movement on trade?" Mr. Juncker said that at his meeting with Mr. Trump, both sides had emphasized that we should have free but fair competition. "We've agreed to bring together Europeans and Americans," he said. "There's going to be a Commission delegation and a Trump delegation in the next few weeks to come together on trade matters because we felt there was too much divergence in our analysis and our measures." How did it go with Macron? The atmosphere between the U.S. conservative and the French centrist appeared strained when they met at the U.S. Embassy in Brussels. The two leaders clasped each other's hands, leaning in towards each other slightly. Mr. Trump started to pull away, but Mr. Macron held on tighter and refused to let him go, the BBC's Tara McKelvey reports. Where else has Trump's first foreign trip as president taken him? He arrived in Brussels on Wednesday from Rome where he met Pope Francis at the Vatican. Before that, he had been to Israel and the Palestinian territories, where he vowed to try to achieve peace in the region, and to Saudi Arabia, where he urged Muslim countries to take the lead in combating radicalization. Mr. Trump will land his tour on the Italian island of Sicily at the G7 summit on Friday.